Hello again, this is Nick Schrammick. I'm here with my partner, Howard Chao, and this is our podcast, What's Next In? And we're looking at legal tech startups in this episode. Today, Howard is going to speak to the founder of Tangibly. So Tangibly is a company that helps companies better manage their trade secrets, anything from algorithms to chemical process to client lists. Companies have their secrets and they need a way to protect them. So this is a SaaS platform that implements best practices to establish company assets as enforceable trade secrets. So Howard, you were a corporate attorney for a long time. You must know a little bit about this space.
Yeah, I was intrigued by this company because, there are a lot of startups in the technologies that try to address the patent protection issue, but we haven't really seen so much on the trade secret side. And trade secrets are also an incredibly important part of IP law and IP protection, as we all know. And not only is it important for ongoing operational purposes, but as you probably know, there have been a lot of lawsuits when key engineers and other employees leave with trade secrets in their heads and sometimes in their hands. And there have been lawsuits about that. And so I think the process of how companies can organize themselves so as to make sure that doesn't happen, and make sure, and when companies hire new people, make sure that their employees have not done that, their new employees have not done that. That's something that could have real value. So I think this is a very interesting concept and company.
Great. Well, let's get right into it. This is Howard with the founder of Tangibly.
Today, I'm very pleased to have Tim Londergan of Tangibly with us. That will be the interviewee. And joining me on the interviewer stand will be Mike Bryant of Knox Capital, old friend and supporter of our events. And perhaps we can start with just a quick self-introduction by Mike. What do you do and what is Knox Capital about?
Hey, Howard, great to see you and Tim. Knox Capital invests in legal tech and tech-enabled services companies, predominantly a bit later stage than Tim's company right now, Tangibly, which we'll talk about. We do make exceptions from time to time when we see great promise and can be helpful in muscling through some of the traditional challenges faced with early stage technology companies. And, I have been a great supporter of Howard doing Insights. I believe it's a great format for companies like Tim to get exposure with Tangibly, and look forward to the discussion today.
Great. All right, we're going to jump right into it, Tim. Tim, could we just start with you giving your origin story, your genesis story? What's your background and how did the company come about?
Going back, I'm a chemist by training. I have a PhD. I had the good fortune of spinning out a company out of the University of Washington in the late 90s during the kind of the optical switch craziness, and did my first IP license as part of that deal. So we licensed a bunch of IP that we had developed at the university. And so if I really think back, the origin of Tangibly goes back to really 1999. And it was sort of this insight as a young scientist turned entrepreneur that, wait a second, we just licensed all this technology and it's all about the patent. And there's one tiny little know-how clause in this patent license, basically, right? But boy, without the knowledge of these, 5 scientists coming over to the other side on the commercialization, none of this would really work, right? And so as sort of my, career unfolded and I went a little deeper into intellectual property, I managed a portfolio at Intellectual Ventures. I just kept seeing the same sort of thing, which was this kind of missing piece of infrastructure around IP licensing when it came to the know-how or the trade secrets. And so, in 2020, I got a call from a guy named Ray Miller, who's now at DLA Piper. And Ray and I had known each other back at our IV days. And he was one of our outside counsel. And Ray basically said, hey, I need some help. Trade secrets are becoming more important. There's no tools. Let's have a conversation. And really that was when I started to kind of put my head down and try to figure out if there was a real software to build. And so, fast forward 2 years and we're in market. Ray's been a great partner at DLA, and we're off to the races. So
yeah, that's great. Well, so you don't have to persuade me of the importance of this area. I was a practicing lawyer at O'Melveny for many years, and I had partners who specialized in litigation in trade secrets, right? I mean, they weren't patent litigators all the time. They were mostly trade secret litigators. And
that's right.
And why were they litigating? Well, maybe it's because people didn't button down things beforehand, right? So, but anyway, so tell us what the essence of your product or technology is. Then what's your maybe it's more the business approach, or is there IP around what you're doing? What do you do?
Well, Howard, I apologize for dodging the first question, but let me just add to what you just said.
Yeah.
And what we found over now 2 years of being at this, what's super fascinating is you go to the big law firms, or frankly, any law firm, and you go into the IP group of that law firm.
Right.
Those IP practitioners are primarily patent attorneys, right?
Right.
Some trademark copyright attorneys, but then there's this big gap, and the people that actually know the trade secret laws are actually litigators. So they're only there to clean up the mess, right? And so what we found is that there's like this big gap in the law firms of proactive transactional attorneys looking after their clients' trade secrets, and that's where once that all sort of crystallized, it's like, oh gosh, there is just this gap. And so, but now to your question, what we did was we went to the litigators, and this was in 2020, stuck in the basement office at home, and talking to any litigator that would talk to me, and just asking the question, like, what goes wrong in litigation, right? These trade secret litigations. And what you somewhat quickly find is the pattern is they walk into a mess. The contracts are either, nowhere to be found, hard to find. And so you just kind of keep seeing the same story. It's kind of a nuts and bolts problem. So that was that. We got that under control, really understood what the litigators need when it comes time to, to file a complaint. And so, but then what we started to sort of understand a little bit more is like what the case law was saying, right? And what the case law start really saying in many cases is that like specificity is becoming more important. So you used to be able to argue, hey, this is a piece of know-how that's been, used in the company for generations, whatever. But now it's like, show us, right? So the courts are saying, show us the documentation. And so, from there, we started to kind of piece together an architecture that, that we thought made sense. And if I can just share my screen real quick, I'll just run through it. Pop this open. And I can swing back to a couple of these slides, but let me just start here for a second. We've encapsulated our architecture into these sort of 5 questions. So what is it? It has to be specific. That is now the new legal standard. Who has access to it? And we've architected around this idea that, roughly you can say, employees, contractors, and partners generally will have access to these assets. What we've learned now, back to my law firm sort of analysis, is that like the best thing you can do with your trade secret is actually just tell them it's a trade secret. If somebody has access to them, just get them on record as knowing it's a trade secret. And so what you see over and over again in litigation is this idea that, well, okay, tell us, did your employer ever tell you this was a trade secret? Answer's often no, right? So we've made that actually just a simple piece of workflow within the tool that says, here, partner X, click through this, acknowledge, and end up with a digital signature receipt. Again, the other way that we think about Tangibly is like stitching together an asset an identity and a contract or multiple contracts. And so in this case, it's an employment agreement, it's an NDA, it's all, whatever your strategy is as a company, find it, make sure it's signed, know when it expires, all that kind of stuff. And then finally, what we kind of teased out from lots of conversations is that training solves lots of problems. It's a great risk mitigation tool, but it's also sort of a great way to build culture, right? Make sure these employees understand this stuff's important. So in effect, we've built a piece of software that helps companies do these 5 things.
Right. So this all sounds very important, and it sounds like people aren't doing it yet, and you're providing them with a system to do it systematically. But how difficult is this? In other words, I mean, once you've done this and you've shown the way, how protectable is what you've done?
So, this is workflow, right? So where we see the sort of the ultimate bigger tech differentiators, I think, is when we get into kind of the downstream analysis and insights. And that's something we've just now started to scratch the surface on. And so, we've got this unique data set. A customer has a unique data store in their trade secret, and in their trade secret catalog. What is it that we tangibly can help them understand about themselves that they don't know, right? And so we're doing some neat stuff on the AI side in terms of data analysis, doing some interesting stuff more on the employee side. So, employee trade secrets are largely a people problem and generally an employee problem. And so starting to do some more automation. So really it's get the nuts and bolts right, get the workflow right. And, yes, is this all fairly simple? Yeah, once it's taken us, 2 years to figure out exactly what this should be and how it should flow and so forth. But we're now starting to sort of see the nuggets that need automated. And once you see that, and you got to do it to see it. Once we start the automation process, we'll start to build further and better moats.
Right. So, Mike, you're a frequent legal investor, specialized legal tech investor. What's your sense of how much demand there will be, pent-up demand there will be for something like this?
Well, I think the game changed with the Trade Secrets Act. Prior to that, it was very decentralized and information was scattered and really just like, almost like complex litigation, right? A company that maybe isn't a serial litigant, they get sued, and all of a sudden they put more proactive measures in place to avoid that very unpleasant experience from occurring again. I think there's enough above the fold type publicity around massive trade secret matters globally that the legal ops profession, which is a fairly new thing, they're focused on this, and they're focused on proactive measures, as it relates to certainly litigation, but privacy, cyber breach, and trade secrets. I think all of these risk buckets that exist in corporate America are being looked at more proactively. I think the market is very large. I think the appetite is there to become proactive versus reactive. Mm-hmm. What I like about the business also is, besides it having a large TAM and I think some real exposure here for the litigants involved, there's a lot of channels to sell to besides corporate. Corporate is the obvious buyer here, but I think that there's many service providers that are advising these litigants, such as law firms. Tim cites DLA Piper. I spoke to a partner friend of mine that's an IP litigator at Saul Ewing. He confirmed that this is a real problem with his clients. I think the more sophisticated patent lawyers are going to want to get out ahead of this and bring something that's a bit more structured in the way that they handle their trade secrets. I think some of the big consultancies, ALSPs, Howard, that you know several of them, and the e-discovery providers that are already trusted in, I'm talking about the $100 million plus providers that are global, that have saved their clients bacon in the past in a reactive mode, are becoming more proactive with privacy solutions, cyber readiness solutions. I think they're well positioned to be a channel for Tangibly. And that's what I like about the market, is I see a lot of ways to tackle this problem with a solution. Even if it is workflow based today, I think some of the analytics and content that is on the roadmap is going to make it super sticky and defensible down the line.
So Tim, I would be very persuaded if, and maybe you've done this, if you were to pull out a bunch of major trade secret cases and do a counterfactual analysis of them and say, well, look, what would have happened if they had Tangibly in place at the time all this blew up, right? And as opposed to they didn't. So so what is your, by the way, what is your go-to-market strategy? How are you going to get to clients, and who are you going to be targeting?
So on the first point, Howard, we've got, I think, 3 of them published right now. We call them a CXO review.
Right.
And it very much is like, let's tease out, what went wrong, and let's put it in terms that non-lawyers can understand.
Right.
And so those have been really well received. We've got about another half a dozen in the pipeline. There's a case from this last year, 2021, called it's Mallet. It's a food science company. And it's a real seminal case in many ways, but it is the documentation was just simply missing, right? And what appears to be, and even in the appeals court, the judge said, appears to be pretty bad behavior on this ex-employee's part, right? Like pretty much theft. Sorry, doesn't meet the legal hurdles, right? So it's not a trade secret. You don't get the protection of the laws. Oops, right? And boy, an afternoon of documenting something would have made a difference, So there's, I wouldn't say countless, but more or less countless cases now. We're up to, there's about 1,400 cases in the U.S. between DTSA and the states. So we've started. So DLA Piper is a channel partner, and so as Mike alluded to, we're really at this stage trying to sell to corporates primarily, use the law firms as channels. Again, as Mike also mentioned, the big consulting companies all have efforts in this space. KPMG probably being the most forward and out there now with a real trade secret practice within their IP group. Deloitte has a smaller team in Asia. So those guys are all now also potential partners for us. And then, we've just been, active on LinkedIn. I was at an innovation conference last week. We're going to be at IP Week in Singapore, big IP conference, global IP conference in Bangkok. So I think we're just now to the point where we're starting to kind of get a really nice flow of inbound. And that includes like really serious, important, people and companies. And so just a couple quick examples, and I won't name names, but the head of IP for, a Fortune 50, reached out and said, we'd love to talk and see what you're doing. We just started an initiative 6 months ago to build a whole new trade secret platform on top of Salesforce, right? And really, when we had the discussion, what kind of stuck with me was like, wow, I'm talking to like the best IP attorneys in the world, right? This is a serious company, and even they are still just getting their feet wet when it comes to trade secret, no understanding. And so like even again, just looking at this slide, they're like, yeah, we're doing this, right? We're planning on doing this, but holy cow, you're right. We do need to do these other things. And so, and then an inbound lead literally just a couple of days ago from one of the biggest food manufacturers in Europe. And so again, I'm just kind of starting to hear and see this sort of consistent drum of, like, we know we got to do something. What are we going to do? And when we go and look at what solutions are out there in the world, they land on Tangibly. So that's pretty cool. So.
Okay, well, so we're running a little short on time here, but I wanted to cover two other things. First, I mean, a quick one, but I mean, what did people do before Tangibly showed up on the screen? So, I mean, that's one question. And then I'd also like to cover your capital formation situation.
So again, well-known Fortune 50s that we've talked to, and three, they're spreadsheet based, right? They're doing number one by virtue of an internal legal army, right? So these are companies that have just massive internal legal budgets. And so it's a brute force method. They embed lawyers into project teams. They have Excel files. They track trade secrets. They track people. They get a ding from their HRMS system that, this person's leaving, got to go chase them down to get them to sign off, this. So it's very manual, and they're using, those types of tools. Capital.
And your capital. Yeah. Where did you get the money, and how much did you raise so far, and what's your plan for the future?
So we did a friends and family round about a little more than a year ago. And that was 750. And that included a gentleman named Mark Britton, who founded Avo. And then we made it to, this year, we haven't quite closed it. We have a pre-seed safe. I think it's going to end up being about 1.3 million-ish. We've got maybe a couple more weeks. And we haven't announced it yet. And so, but Wilson Sonsini invested, or WS Investments, which is their investment arm, and Madrona in Seattle. And so we feel, I should say, I'm super excited to have, the likes of Madrona and Wilson behind this, and I think it's going to make a big impact. So
great. That's exciting. Well, we're running out of time here. Mike, do you have any last questions before we wrap it up?
No, I will just add that I'm starting to see some additional IP technology providers hit the scene. I just saw, in fact, this week, it's early stage. They're earlier than Tangibly. They have not built their product yet, but they're trying to attack the vast amount of IP that exists in higher education right now. The big universities, and trying to optimize the licensing opportunities, tracking the IP, number one, and then monetizing it to a greater extent. But I think I just look at the fact that there is new money coming in to solve these problems. I really like where Tangibly is, again, because of the, I think there's more than one customer to sell to here. And there's more than one way to get to that customer, some very vibrant channels to get access. So, it's great to hear, Tim. I had not heard about how close you are on the safe. So we should chat further.
Awesome. Great.
Well, that's a very interesting presentation, Tim.
Thanks, Howard. Thanks, Mike.
Okay.
Thank you.